talk with my mouth full because I'm drunk. Ah. Hi everyone, it's me Simone, and I have got a treat for you. So I've always wanted to make videos about the books that I am reading. Well, that's not true. I think there was a period in time where I wasn't reading books because I was just like, fuck education. Anyway, now I'm at a point where I do want to read books and I do want to make videos about them, and I hope you enjoy them. However, the little caveat that I have is that I don't want to just do a normal book review. I want to do drunk book reviews. So what I'm going to do is I've just finished reading a book, I didn't like it, and I'm going to get drunk and tell you about it. For this video, I've decided to do Eligible by Curtis Sittenfeld. This is the newest novel from Curtis Sittenfeld. This book actually is a modern retelling of Pride and Prejudice. It even says it, a modern retelling of Pride and Prejudice. And I was thinking, what would be the best drink to go with a book about Pride and Prejudice? Well, back then, in the 19th century, there was basically wine, wine, and more wine. So that's what I've decided to do. I've got myself here a nice little cold bottle of rosé, because not only is it important that we're drinking wine while reviewing this book, but also because rosé is a girl's best friend. It's a twist top. Make it easier for them ladies. And I will get to drinking. Cheers. Also, I've put out some snacks for me to enjoy because I'm a classy lady like that. So before I get too drunk, let me go over the premise of the book. So as I told you before, this book is based on Pride and Prejudice. The thing about that is Pride and Prejudice is a really complex book. If you've never read Pride and Prejudice before, I would suggest definitely going out and reading it, because it is one of the best novels ever written. Very, very complex story about a family of young women who have this nagging mother who's trying to get them married off. Basically their tumultuous ride to the altar. That's the best that I can explain it without getting too much into detail. If you don't want to read the book, I would highly recommend the BBC made-for-TV series Pride and Prejudice, starring Jennifer Eel and Colin Firth, who, by the way, looks excellent as he dives into his fountain only wearing a shirt and some like pants, whatever. I don't know. They wore a lot of underwear in the 19th century. This book is supposed to take place in the 21st century, so there were a couple of things that I think Curtis Sittenfeld kept in mind in order for the audience now to understand it. So first of all, the story takes place in Cleveland, Ohio. I'm gonna have a chip because I am feeling pretty drunk and I'm on an empty stomach. So some of the characters in this novel have exactly the same names that they have in Pride and Prejudice. For example, everyone in the Bennet family has the same name. Mr. and Mrs. Bennet is the same. Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, Kitty, and Lydia are all the same. Mr. Darcy is the same. The characters of Caroline Bingley is also the same. However, Charles Bingley is a little bit different. In this novel, Charles Bingley is also named Chip Bingley, which I guess is like a nickname that people use for Chip or Charles or whatever. And the name of Charles Bingley is now Chip Bingley in this novel. And the reason why this book is called Eligible is because Chip Bingley was famous for a reality TV show similar to that of The Bachelor, and he goes on it and he doesn't find love, and then for some reason he gets heartbroken, decides to go work for a hospital in Cleveland. Mr. Darcy follows along, so does Caroline. Other things to kind of keep in mind about this novel is that all of the Bennet girls are 10 years older than they were in Pride and Prejudice. So oldest, Jane Bennet, is now 39 years old, which apparently is fucking old. Because in the 19th century, if you didn't get married by the time you were 29, then you're basically gonna get yourself a couple of cats and start knitting yourself a couple sweaters. I am really drunk already, and I haven't even gotten to how I think about the book. So basically, Pride and Prejudice is a romance novel. They go through twists and turns, things all of a sudden happen, truths are revealed, and in the end, everyone ends up happily ever after. Eligible is pretty much the same in terms of premise, except the only thing is that It's in the 21st century. However, there were some upsetting parts that I am gonna get into right now. Overall, I give this book a 3 out of 5 because as great as it was on its own, and I think that if you've never read Pride and Prejudice, never heard of Pride and Prejudice, I think that you will actually like this novel. It's really cute, it's really fun, it's really intricate, but at the same time, it's just not Pride and Prejudice. And I think that calling it a modern retelling of Pride and Prejudice is a little bit off base. There have been so many movies and TV shows and books written in the style of Pride and Prejudice, and none of them really are far from the truth than Eligible. Well, maybe actually Bridget Jones's Diary, but the premise there is still exactly the same. Spoiler alert, everything probably from this point is going to be giving away some of the story. So some of the major points that I wanted to point out about this novel that I really didn't believe and didn't think were true to the novel, and I think would have probably upset Jane Austen nowadays. The first part is Jane. And Jane in this novel is this almost 40-year-old woman who wants to have a child, so she decides to artificially inseminate. She then meets Chip Bingley, who she falls in love with. When I think of The Bachelor, I think of a bunch of dudes and a bunch of women that want to just get famous, and so they act ridiculously. They act in a way that kind of doesn't truly represent them. I don't know. Maybe I might also be super old-fashioned and I'm just like, oh no, don't go on online websites and like Tinder and all those junks. Just find someone naturally. And then there's Elizabeth, who is a writer in New York City, who I totally see happening for her because, like, in Pride and Prejudice, she just seems like this super strong woman who's, like, gonna get shit done. And so she, like, goes to New York and starts writing for a magazine. Although, I would not see her as the type of person to write for a fashion magazine. I would see her more of, like, a journalist for an actual newspaper. I hate the fact that Mr. Wickham was someone that she had met in like her internship days rather than someone that they recently met. But I guess then that would make the randomness of the next part I'm going to talk about a little bit more random. So Mr. Wickham and Mr. Darcy in the original Pride and Prejudice are enemies. And basically what happened is that Mr. Wickham fucked over Mr. Darcy's younger sister, Georgiana. He basically bribed Mr. Darcy for money in order to, like, go and disappear. Mr. Darcy and Mr. Wickham also were, like, close brothers. They were really, really close as they were growing up. What happens in Eligible? Well, Mr. Wickham meets Elizabeth while they were interning at a magazine back when she was, like, 22 years old. She doesn't meet Mr. Darcy until she is back in Cleveland and like when the story takes place. So she and Mr. Wickham have been having like these trysts over the last few years or the last 6 months, but they've been friends for a really long time. Also, I don't know about you, but like if I had a thing for my friend, I would tell him, you know? I would not wait till I was like fucking 37 and wait for him to be like, it's been you the entire time. And I was like, oh, finally you get it. I feel like Elizabeth would have a little bit more of a backbone, and she would like be like, yo, come over here and like do things to my body and stuff. You know what I mean? Elizabeth isn't just this like lady in waiting. She has no problems turning men down. I kind of forgot what I was talking about. Then she meets Mr. Darcy in Cleveland years after she has met Mr. Wickham, and coincidentally they went to college together, And Mr. Darcy had a hand in Mr. Wickham being expelled from school only a couple of weeks before graduation. Yeah, it's just not believable. Like, I don't believe that you can meet someone like 10 years ago and finally have like the relationship that you want, and then meet the guy that was responsible for having him kicked out of school and then hold a grudge against that guy. It just is like, it's not enough. It's just like a huge piece, by the way, because like Mr. Darcy is like in love with Elizabeth the entire time and like is trying to get with her, but it's really impossible because he's like messed up everything with Jane and Mr. Bingley. There was like all this stuff that was happening, and it just was like, yeah, okay, those are things that do happen, but is it enough really to like discredit someone or call someone like basically just like hate them? I don't think so. So the last thing I kind of want to talk about this novel before I end this video is this scene that happened that I was like, what the fuck? I get into it, I feel like I have to explain a little bit of the original novel. So in the original novel, it doesn't work out for Mr. Wickham and Elizabeth Bennet. However, Mr. Wickham's been playing the game. He doesn't have only one player in the game. He has few. And the other person in the game is Lydia. So he's been playing both Elizabeth and Lydia. I don't know why, because like his whole motivation is money and they don't have any money. So I was like, why do you even care about this woman? When Elizabeth kind of like puts him down, he tries to get it with Lydia. And eventually they run away and then they get married because Mr. Darcy finds them and he wants to like reconcile everything with Elizabeth and make everything better. So in this novel though, Lydia does not run away with Mr. Wickham, but instead it's another person named Ham. The thing about Ham is that he's transgender. And apparently that's a bad thing. I feel like this day and age, you could be transgender and you can fall in love and you can be with someone and that's cool. There are people generations before ours, people who don't understand transgender, and so they kind of lash out. And that's what happens in this novel. So Lydia decides to run away with Ham. The whole family is messed up about it, and then Elizabeth kind of uses that as an excuse to escape hanging out with Mr. Darcy. At this point in the novel, Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth are kind of getting along and they're kind of becoming friends, and her feelings for him are kind of deepening. And that's exactly what happens in the novel before abruptly like Elizabeth has to leave, she has to go back home, she has to help with the search for Lydia. The urgency for her to go home doesn't feel real, because even though someone is getting married to a transgender person, it's not the end of the world. It's not like they've been kidnapped against their will and they're like being held hostage for a certain amount of money, which is the kind of feeling that you get in Pride and Prejudice. For this one, it just felt like two people that wanted to run away. But I think that a lot of that could have just been managed over the phone, and she didn't necessarily have to go home in order to help them find them. Everything about Mrs. Bennet is about status. So I can understand Mrs. Bennet being completely upset about that because her status would change. People would know that like her kid married a transgender person, and apparently that is bad in some small way. I don't get how that's enough for Elizabeth to leave Mr. Darcy in the efforts they were making. It just felt a little bit too small. And I feel like everything in this book was a little bit too small. Even Mr. Darcy's penis. I feel like the only big one that actually kind of made a little bit of sense was Mr. Bingley kind of getting freaked out by the fact that Jane got pregnant. And I feel like that's a big thing. Having a child is a huge thing, and like not something that you kind of jump into lightly. For Jane, it made sense because that's what she's been planning to do, but for Mr. Bingley, Chip, it wasn't something that he was planning, so I can totally understand him kind of running away and freaking out. I feel like if he loved Jane as much as he does in the novel, then he would actually just love Jane. and not like go off and try to like make something of himself in another reality TV show, which is what he did. And I think that's it. That's like all the things that this novel kind of represented to me. I honestly feel like if you are a die-hard Pride and Prejudice fan, it's not going to really make you feel good. It didn't really resonate for me, but I know that there are people out there that would read it and be like, oh my god, it's so good. I feel like in Bridget Jones's Diary, getting cheated on, that feels real. Hating someone because they had a hand in them like getting kicked out of college, like one out of like a panel of people were kicking him out. It was just like, it doesn't make sense to me. Ow. And I think that's it. I don't think I have anything else that I wanted to really talk about that stood out about this novel for me. I really hope you enjoyed it. And you can find me on Goodreads. My name is Your Open Palms. Duh. And you can follow me on Goodreads if you like reading books. Most of the books I read are YA, so get ready for that trip. And I look forward to seeing you again at the next Drunk Book Club. Alright, bye now.